All right, welcome to the Cattlemen. I'm your host Seth King, and I'm pretty excited to be sitting down today with Dalkena Highlands. How are you, Derek?
Doing good. Thank you, sir, for having us on.
Good. Derek Smith is who I'm sitting down with today, and then his wife is Honey Smith. You guys are out in Washington, Newport. Is that correct?
Yep, Newport, Washington, up in the northeast corner.
Okay. All right. We're gonna get into a little bit of little bit of conversation about regenerative grazing. Is that the right? Did I use the right term?
Yep, regenerative agriculture and kind of when it comes to the cattle, what that encompasses, what we follow on this farm.
Great. So we'll get into that. It's it's a timely topic. I've touched on this a little bit. I think in the last episode, we now have the education committee. Well, I shouldn't say we now. We've been part of the education committee through the American Highland Cattle Association, and we're really getting a lot of help, interaction, and support from the education committee that Kimber and I are a part of. And you guys popped up as someone who would be knowledgeable on a very relevant topic right now as far as regenerative grazing goes, because grass is growing. It's that time of year.
Mhm.
It's a little muddy maybe, but we're getting there. At least here in the Midwest. Um,
Mhm.
so it's kind of that time of year that people are thinking about, well, boy, like how do I manage that and move forward? And can I have more cattle? And is my pasture able to support more cattle, or do I need to back it off, or whatever the case might be. So we'll get into that here in a little bit. But Derek, if you don't mind, give us a little bit of background on you guys and kind of what you're doing, how you got started, and what you see for the future.
Yeah, so I'm a firefighter by trade. That's what I do. And started my family. We bought a little piece of acreage in Western Washington, and we kind of started having some animals, chickens, the basics. And I had always wanted to get bigger. And as the kids started to get a little bit bigger, talking to Honey, I was like, I want something. I want more land. I want to be out in the country, to raise the family. And she signed off on it. We looked and we found our farm. And then it was this mad scramble of, well, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm never been a farmer. I've never done any of this stuff. I've never raised cattle. So it was before I even stepped foot on the property, I better start doing some reading. And the nice thing for me was I got to kind of pick whichever path I wanted. I found one that intrigued me and interested me. So I started doing a lot of reading of Greg Judy, Joel Saladin, Alan Savory, um, Gabe Brown, a lot of these regenerative agriculture people and there's many, many other people that I followed. And I listened to what they said and I said, this is what I want to do. I want to raise good ground and have happy animals above it. And that is how we got started. And so we moved out here. It's about 120 acres. And pretty much the first animals that we brought out were Highland cows. And then it's been a crazy ride ever since.
Wow. Derek, I don't think we talked about this, but I'm setting aside my differences today to interview you because I'm a former police officer, and firefighters and police officers. I'm just joking. No, we always loved you guys. You firefighters are the best. Police officers don't like firefighters because they wish they were firefighters as well.
Well, that's always the joke, but I will say the police officers make sure that I'm safe when I'm out there because so we appreciate all of them for what they do because they keep me safe.
Absolutely. But yes, thank you for what you do in your service as well. So you guys are on 120 acres, is that right?
Yeah, we're just about 120 acres. The farm that we bought it was an old farm. It had been really used and abused for a long time and it become pretty dilapidated. So it was me coming in and figuring out how to kind of bring back the beauty of it. I'm kind of OCD in nature, so I wanted my farm to be picture perfect. And so then I came out here and I was like, okay, how do I make the grass healthy again using the practices that I had studied upon? And it was actually my dad. My dad moved out into the region with me, my parents, and he was like, we need to push for the cows. We need to get the cows on there. We need to start rotationally moving them or mob grazing them. And that was then the move. And then it was the massive learning curve of how to make it easier, the chores of it, because with mob grazing, with what we do, we move our cows every day. And there's reasons for that, but that was the practices. And then how do I make it so the chores are easier to bring this all together? The reason we went down the Highland path was we love our Highlands, but the reason I originally picked Highlands was I needed a cow that was, for one, going to be easy on me as a first time cattle owner. I needed one that was going to be a good mom, that was going to take care of itself, good, birth on its own. I mean, I'd never pulled a calf, none of that stuff. So I needed a cow that was going to do all these things, that was going to produce a good beef, because we are also we do raise for beef. But the big one is I needed a cow that was going to be able to eat everything I put in front of it, because my ground was so beat up, from weeds to less than grasses to good grasses. Also, I needed it to eat everything. And because of how I was going to mob graze, because I needed the cows to do what I needed to do them to do to start to heal this land and bring it back. And then the world of Highland, that cool factor blew up into itself, where learning the genetics, the cool history. But I always say, when it comes to me, I am a grass farmer first, because if I have good grass, I have happy cows. I have happy cows. I have a good product at the end of the day.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's get into it then. So you're on 120 acres, but you're mob grazing. Are you saying mob is an MOB? Is that correct?
Mob, yeah. So in the world of, I'll kind of start in the beginning of the things I've learned. In the world of grazing, you've got different ways, and there's a lot of ways to do this, and everybody's land is different. Your rainfall, the type of grasses, and everything. So this is kind of a very simplified, which is how I like to look at it. I'm a simple guy. I look at the basics of it and go from there. I like the deep science of it, but when I talk to people, it's like I just like the very simplified aspect. So, in the world of grazing, there's the big open grazing. Then there's your basic rotational grazing, which you have sectioned off chunks of land, and you're moving your cows to different chunks to alleviate some of the pressure. You then have strip grazing, which you're moving your cow strip by strip. And then you have mob grazing, which is basically really intense strip grazing on another level. And so what we do is I set up a paddock, and then I move my cattle every day. And the reason that I do this is because of the science of what's going on with the grass. So when it comes to grass, is what you see above is below, right? So your root system below and your leaf system above. So you have to look at that first. And what I want to do is I want to put the cattle on the ground, and I want them to eat everything. I want them to eat it all down to about 4 inches. My number is about 4 inches. 4 to 6 is a good window. Okay. I want them to eat everything, and I want them to eat, as I say, all the food groups. When it comes to cattle eat their ice cream first. So as they're doing their little section and what they're doing, they're going to eat their ice cream. Then they're going to eat their fruits, their strawberries. Then they're going to come around and they're eat their vegetables, the vegetables that everybody's okay with. Then they're going to come back and eat their mediocre vegetables. And then there's their weeds. And I want them to go through my section, and I want them to do the circle, and I want them to hit it all. And the reason that I do this is when they hit it all, cows wrap with their tongue and pull. And what they, some of the new science of it is there is a sympathetic reaction of almost like a stress signal that's sent when there's that pull versus a clip with teeth that sends a signal almost instantaneously. It releases acids and other hormones within the grasses, which then basically sends a signal to the root. The root says, okay, I got all these stored carbohydrates and all these nutrients that I've been building up. I'm going to stop doing what I'm doing and I'm going to send everything up. And what we need to do then, what happens is this signal sends up, it's going to start to grow. We then need to allow new growth to happen of another 4 to 6 inches so that grass can then start photosynthesis again back down to the root system to then start storing back up. The problem that a lot of people have is when they put something on the ground, a cow will come through, they eat the ice cream, they eat all the other stuff. And if they leave them on that ground too long, the root does what it needs to. It sends up the signal. The ice cream of grasses just starts to grow. And then what happens? The cow comes back in and says, well, this is like mom's fresh churned ice cream. This is the good stuff. This isn't just store-bought ice cream anymore. This is the good stuff. And it immediately hits it again. The problem that happens from that is now photosynthesis hasn't fully occurred to replenish the root. And the root will be like, okay, I don't have much energy left. I'm going to try once again. But if you don't give me a break and let me replenish, then all of a sudden you stunt the ice cream. And then it's a triggering domino effect if they're left on because it stunts ice cream, then they'll stunt the strawberries, and then they'll stunt the decent vegetables. And then what you're left at the end is mediocre vegetables and weeds. And you don't want weeds. Now, your cow's still eating green grass, but it's not the stuff that we want them to eat. We want the whole, as a lot of the guys say, salad bar of grass is growing in our field. So it's a matter of, for me, I put them on a section once a day, and depending on the time of the season, if the grass is not as long, I'll open it up a little bit because I want them to hit it, but I don't want them to hit it too hard. And if it's all of a sudden growing like gangbusters, I cram them in tight. And if I walk out there the next day and there's too much growth, I need to cram them tighter because I want them to take it all down. I want them to take everything down because when they do that, they eat everything, including the mediocre vegetables and the weeds. And then when I let it rest, the ice cream, strawberries, and other good perennial grasses that we really want more of for the nutrient value for the cows and for good ground, those come up and they actually start to suppress. The other thing that it does is everybody, no matter where you has a seed bank that is in your ground ready to pop. And all it needs is ideal situation from a little bit of um, agitation in the soil from a cow hoof to opened up to the sunlight to urine, manure, and other things, the MPK levels to be at the right levels, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the potassium levels, all those to kind of hit. And then all of a sudden you have your regional seed banks all of a sudden pop up. And these are the ones where, in some aspects, these guys that have been doing this for a lot longer are seeing grasses that haven't been present in a long time that are starting to pop and are really cool to be seen.
Wow. I didn't know that you were basically a scientist and a firefighter. This is, we might have to just have like a part two episode here. So I'm just like, I have so many questions.
Yep.
I guess like for our listeners and for myself, um, can you give us an idea of how many head you're running together and kind of the size of the area to where they're
Yep.
doing all of that within, you said one day, right? You're moving
Yeah.
one day.
So this, I get asked this question a lot And it's again, it's a moving target for everybody. When I first got started, I bought 10 Highlands, right? And then what I had to do was I had to watch the ground and put them on it. So, you know, a lot of people come up to me and they're like, well, I only have 10 acres. I don't have almost 120. That's awesome that you get to do this, but I don't have that. And I say it's all in scale. It truly is. So for me now, I've been doing it long enough that I'm able to I've been bumping my numbers up and up and up because my grouse every year is getting better and better and better to where I can now run where I started with 10. I can run 60 head of cattle almost on my ground because I almost need them to move quickly on my place to suppress, to eat the grass all the way down and keep them moving in the big circle. The thing now that I do is if I can't move because there's also a factor of if you can't, you want to get your cattle on the ground, on your grass before it hits seed banks and everything, because when it hits seed banks, it all of a sudden it's where your root is sending its energy. You want it sending to grow leaf growth. That's where you really want things to be popping. When it goes to seed bank, everything changes. So I'm trying to always hit it in a circle constantly. And if I realize I can't get my cattle on this fast enough, I'm going to go past this state of prime. I then go out there and I flail mow it, and I put the green manure or the green mulch back down. Basically, it's a mechanized cow is the way I look at it. So it all has to really do with what time of year. It also has to do with how much rain you get. We out here get about 28 inches of rain each year. We're kind of in a nice little valley, so I'm not. There's areas nearby that get quite a bit less, but and they're Western Washington, Western Oregon area that I know people over there that do this. They get a lot more. They get easier growth, especially in the summertime. I also know that like Gabe Brown out of the Dakotas, he's dealing with 12 inches of rain. And so you can do it in many different regions. It's a matter of what grass are you growing, how many cattle you got, how much you're shrinking them down and moving them, how much rest are you able to get the ground and give the ground at the end, and then putting them back on it. When you build your ground doing these things, you are building the system, you are taking in more carbon sequestering, you're putting your MPK, your grasses, you're getting more ice cream, more fruits and good vegetables growing and less mediocre vegetables and weeds. And then the beauty of it is when it does rain, you actually are holding back more moisture than losing it if it's overgrazed or the ground is turned or anything like that, because you're keeping your temperature drastically lower at the soil level and the root system is helping to retain the water. With some of the interesting things that have happened to me on my farm was twofold that I have seen in this is it's not fast. I'll say this whole process is not a fast process. You're working with Mother Nature with your animals, and yeah, bringing out synthetics would really crank things up on grass growth and everything, but that changes a lot of things from the soil health to what the plant is actually getting. So you have to be willing to slow down on this. But two things that happened on my ground since I've started that really kind of reiterated that I was doing well was I had almost 10 acres of lupin. And everybody, I didn't know what I was doing. And everybody said, don't put your animals on lupin. You're going to miscarry your cows. They're going to get sick. Don't put them on this. As well as I had people tell me, don't put them on this grass or this grass or this grass. And I did some reading, and you know what I did? I put it on there. I put them on there. Now I opened it up to make sure that they got a good salad bar. I didn't squish them solely onto the lupin, but I took 10 acres of lupin and I have shrunk it down in the years to almost it's a very small chunk now. I haven't put anything on it. All I've done is my cows. The other thing that really reiterated that this was working is I have a great neighbor, third generation, running cattle. He tries to do a lot of this stuff, but he does more of an open grazing situation. He rotates, and he's been here long enough and has a lot of local chunks of land that he's able to lease for his. And last year we started to get pretty warm and the grass was starting to stop growing because once it hits at temperatures, things really slow down. And the funny thing happened was I was talking to him and it was beginning of July, and he's like, Derek, I'm almost out of grazing land. I'm starting to struggle. I might need to start bringing in hay. He's like, I don't know how you're doing it because you're only running 40 acres of your land right now with 30 cows, and you're still doing circles on it, and it's still green. And that hit home like, huh, I guess this stuff does kind of work. It just takes time. And that's the thing is you have to be patient with it. Um, it was, for me, I always told myself I wanted as many cows as I could, but I had to realize, okay, I got to start with 10 and I got to build. And my land, my grass, like I said, I'm a grass farmer. My grass tells me where I build to and go from.
Interesting. So I have a lot of questions. Still have. Trying to think of the direction I want to go in here, or maybe you can kind of move us in that direction. But so for someone that wants to do this, that wants to try this, um, I guess my question would be, uh, are you seeking out a certain demeanor of animal? Are you like in my mind, if I'm assuming you're using some type of temporary fence, you
Mhm.
you want to get a range cow from Nebraska that's going to run through it. Are you looking for a certain demeanor of animal doing this? And then also how, from a practical standpoint, are you actually moving them every day?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, yeah. So I do look for a good demeanor. So the way we move is we move with a single strand of uh, braided wire fence. And it used to be that I had this whole my whole place, I didn't have fence on it. It was 120 acres of pretty much non-fenced. And I moved my cattle solely with the mobile single line. Um, I have brought in more cattle from solely beef operations, right? Very little hands-on to cattle that are Highlands that are halter broken. You can walk like a dog. I've got them all. There is a training aspect to that. I have had ones that are a little more problematic. They usually go down a different path a little quicker than some of the other ones. But most of the time, if you give your cattle a good chunk of green grass, it's that whole thing of the grass is always greener on the other side. But if your grass is green on this side, they're going to stay put.
Right.
So for me, it's like if I got cows jumping and moving, it's because I'm doing something wrong on my ground. I'm not moving them fast enough, or I didn't give them enough space to give them the salad bar. And my cows, once they kind of learn the routine, I mean, they hear the clicking of my reel as I'm reeling up. They know exactly where the opening is, and they stand and wait. It's like a dog being let out, waiting at the door to be let outside. Let's stand and wait. I open it up, they go to the next one, and there they go. And so I have now made myself, for my own sanity and peace of mind, I do have um, high tensile fencing around my whole perimeter, and that has allowed me to know that if they get out of the paddock that I have set up for them, at least I know they're going to stay put. That's the one thing that it's taken time for me to build that out. um, and then but most of the time it is just within a little paddock, single strand, step in posts. Um, I used to run a little solar charger that I plug, that I tap into. Now with the electric line around my perimeter, this allows for me to tap in and move. So this is all the things of, like I was saying at the beginning, of when I first started, it was slower and a little more cumbersome to do this. And then as time has gone on, I've realized, okay, I need a permanent fence for my own peace of mind, but it also allows me to tap into hard electricity right there so that I have a good zap going and I can set this up and whatnot. The other thing that then we did was water. I always tell people, I'm like, when you are looking at rotational mob grazing, whatever path you go down, the water is the key. Okay. Water, you need to build your whole operation around your water. Okay. Because I know everybody's water situation is different. Luckily, I put a water line down the center of my pasture that taps into my main water source so that I have a mobile water trough that moves with my cows. Well, not everybody might have that. Some people don't have the property to need that. Some people have a frost-free bib at a barn. And how do I make this work in these practices? And this is where I always tell people, I'm like, don't get sucked into thinking you have to do it like me. Like I just had a gentleman out here last week, and he was like, I'd really love to do something like this, but I don't know how. I have a barn, I have water at the barn, and I got a couple trees for shade. And I said, well, let me see your property on satellite view. And he's going to put a permanent fence in there. And he's like, I'm looking at putting, some cross fencing in. I'm like, that's great. He's like, but I'm going to move them from one section to the next back and forth. And I told him, I was like, that's good. But I was like, you are probably going to be bringing in hay in the dry season and probably sooner rather than later. I was like, but if you look at it like this, think of your property as almost like a wheel, like spokes on a wheel. Make your barn, make your water, make those trees your main hub. That's kind of your write-off area. That's going to get a little more punished. It just is. And that's okay because that is what your property allows for. But I was like, if you then utilize temporary fence and you start moving it in almost like spokes on a wheel, and you have them over here, and then you let them graze that. And in the world of grass, right, you can graze. The regrowth doesn't really start happening for almost 4 days or so. So the signal's sent. So you can bend the rules a little bit to where you can leave your cows onto an area for 4, even some grasses pushing 6 days before that regrowth that you don't want them to hit again. And I was like, so you can keep them in this section. And I was like, you don't, he only wants to run a couple cows. I was like, keep them tight, make the spokes small. They travel into the barn, they have some shade, they got some water, and then move them, just kind of skip them. By the time you come all the way around, you are well past 3 weeks, which 21 days allows for a huge amount of photosynthesis to happen to bring the carbohydrates back down to the roots to replenish that. And then you just start over. Soon as I said that, I saw the light bulb go on in his head. Like, yeah, I don't need to do it like you. No, you don't. My operation's very, very different. I was like, you need to do it what your operation, but you can do it in a way that you still give your ground rest. And I was like, what you'll notice is your spokes that after time will become so lush and green, you're going to be calling me up and be like, I need more cows because I need to hit this spoke harder, which is what everybody wants. Everybody wants more cows. Once you have one, you want more. It's just you keep wanting more. But your ground is what accommodates that, because at the end of the day, a lot of the times what hinders people is hay prices. When you got to bring in supplemental feed, every time you bring in more, it costs more and more. And then it's like, ouch, that hurts the pocketbook. Me, if I can keep grazing them well into winter and whatnot, now I have hard winters where I'm at, so I have to accommodate for that. And that's a whole nother part of this grazing aspect where um, we put carbon back on the ground, so I leave more down. But that's a whole nother topic that we could get into about winter. But in the growing seasons, and so I always say, I'm like, look at your situation, look at your water, build everything you got when it comes to this idea around what you're able to do with your water. If you're able to move your water trough, beautiful. You're able to do a mobile trough like me, awesome. Because I will, like I've told him and I've told many people, is, and I've done it myself where I'm like, everything's going great, it's going awesome. And then I was like, I bent the rules a little bit. And I was like, I'm going to let them do this a little bit more. And all of a sudden, I saw it in the ground. I set it backwards and it doesn't recover quick. You know, it's like a broken leg. It takes time and effort to rebuild it. And as good as cows and animals can be on ground to make the grass and ground better, they can also punish it in a way that it makes it so that it will take a long time to grow. And there's a real fine line between that you have to follow.
Can you tell us a little bit about your mobile water trough system?
Yeah, so right now it's basically just I hook it up to 300 feet of hose, and I hook it up to my side by side. So I let my cows into the next paddock, and I hook it up to my side by side, and I just nudge it forward. And as I need to, I can tap into different, basically points for me to allow for me to hit all my different sections. This is then where, as time has gone on, I have grown and changed. Even for me, like I used to throw out, because when you're moving like this, I mean, I originally wanted to started with when I wanted to start with the eclectic group of minerals. The cows come in, they pick and choose what they want. And then I realized, I'm like, this is a nightmare. To move them with all this and this, I was like, I'm struggling. So then it was like, okay, I'm going to put out the salt block, just the standard old cattle sock block, the one that works for my situation that I need. Which there's a whole science of minerals for the cows and then minerals for the ground as well, what's coming out the backside of waste. There's a whole nother topic there that we could talk about. So I was dealing with salt blocks. Well, moving every day, finding the block after they've moved it with their nose and everything all over the place, that then became a chore. So then what I did was I went and I had my welder buddy. He welded me up a sled that I attached to my water trough, and I have my minerals on top of my sled. And now I hook my side by side to my water trough, and it pulls everything daily with it. This did not happen on year one. Heck, this happened on like year 6 of this whole operation. This is me learning as a first generation farmer and learning about how to make the chores work, especially if I'm not here and my wife has taken them, that I can do things in a timely fashion, also in like moving them, because on a farm you've got a million other chores other than just moving the cows, right? The cows is just one part, so I have to move the cows and then I got to go do another project, so I have to move them and also have enough time at the end of the day to still do my other projects. These were how I progressed through changing my minerals, changing my water. The one that I'm trying to correlate really closely into right now is one of the things that Highlands deal with a little bit more is heat, right? So they get hot. And I try to give them shade as much as possible, because now I know that I can put them in open pasture and they're going to be okay, because as long as I got good grass, I have cooler ground, they can lay on the ground. You want the cows to be cooler, they eat more, they put on more weight, whatnot. And happier cows, right? So the biggest thing I have a lot of open pasture. So how do I keep my cows cool? Well, I have some creek trees that I'm able to tap them into. I have a couple areas of cedars, and when the heat really kicks up, I start to tweak my grazing to where I'm opening up a chunk and then I'm allowing them back a path to go to the trees. The problem that this arises is I am now in the understanding of what the environmental situation is causing me. I am having to punish certain chunks of ground more, which is setting that ground backwards, but I'm having a happier cow, which now is this sense of I'm trying to figure out how can I do a mobile shade unit with my cows, whether I build it, buy it. This is my next expense for me of truly taking my rotational mob grazing to another level, to where they're not backtracking to shade, to my one piece of shade, because even though I'm moving them to the next section, they're going back there, and then that turns into a big write-off. I don't want any write-off. I know every situation is different, but in my pasture, I don't want it. So I want all the amenities they need to be mobile. This is going to take me a little bit to get there. It's not going to be quick. This year I'm going to still have to operate how I did last year, and I tweak it every year to kind of alleviate it. I've I've come up with better ideas and whatnot. And this is why the big thing of look at your ground and see what it needs. I have taken 30 cows and given them an acre because that's what the grass needed. I've taken 30 cows and put them into a 100 by 100, basically 150 by 150 box with all the things they need with a little chunk of shade, and they eat everything. And the funny thing is, I've gone out there the next day. I'm like, man, there was so much grass growth right in this spot. I actually need to shrink it down more. Now, you have to be careful because, cows get rowdy and then that's where they bump the line. So there's the fine line of doing what you need to do, to where if I needed to shrink them more, but the cows aren't going to really allow for it by their temperament, I'll move them. And then this is where I come back with the mechanical grazing operation and I chop down what they didn't take. And this is where I balance it all.
Yeah, I'm glad you addressed shade because that was going to be my next question. I mean, obviously, it's so important. So thank you for talking about that. I did have a question. What about, are you providing any forage or is it, I guess as far as roughage, I guess I should say. I know a lot of guys will, they put cattle out on pasture and they'll still throw a bale of hay out there, just to, if anything, keep them
Yep.
from being real loose. Can you tell us a little bit about how you do that or don't do that and why?
No, so one thing as I've seen through, you watch the backside of your cow more than anything, honestly, because for me, I want what's coming out the back more than anything. I mean, that's what I really want on the ground. But you want it to be, you're looking for that perfect consistency of a cow pie. Okay. And that's what you want because perfect consistency. You want that nice cow pie. The bugs hit it just right. You want the bugs to hit it. The dung beetles come in, they then pull the dung down into the ground. There is a transition period from winter grazing, sitting on dry grass bales and whatnot, whatever you're feeding, to then the transition, which is where I start to open up. I have my winter ground and then I start to open them up and I give them a little bit of both. And I watch the backside and then I transition them. And the cow stomach is an amazing thing. It really does adapt to what it needs, to where it goes out. I do notice it goes a little bit loose, but within a week, the cow's stomach all of a sudden realizes, man, I'm rocking and rolling on high sugar grasses right now. And all of a sudden it immediately changes. And the big thing is this is also where I always tell people, I'm like, I don't monoculture my grass. I salad bar my grass. So I'm not putting them on straight Timothy. they're hitting all the fescues, Timothy, foxtail, red top, clover, um, everything. I get them into canary grass. I get them on the weeds. When they get all that stuff, you know, it's better for the gut. It's like a human, you know. We sit down, we eat a good round, you know, a good plate of different things. You get your meat, your veggies, your potatoes, whatever. If you eat just one thing or the other, all of a sudden it can screw up your gut. It can make it upset because it's just one thing. It's not the whole thing. So that's where there is a transition. But then once they go into the grass and I can see that everything's really clicking, then they're out. Now, I then watch my cattle because if a cow is not fixing itself, right, and I have all my other ones that are doing fine, and I have one that's not, now I don't have a grass problem. I have a cow problem. I have to address that problem. What's going on with that cow? And then that's a whole different thing that I deal with.
Sure. And you know, maybe Derek, if you weren't eating so much ice cream, they'd probably be okay too. I was, I love ice cream. I eat a lot of ice cream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and this whole I really wanted to. I'm a hunter and fisherman. I love hunting and fishing. That's, you know, that's what I've been doing since I was little. And I bring elk and deer home, and I've been feeding it to my family for a long time. And I was like, okay, well, I want to raise cattle, and I want them to be basically raise how Mother Nature intended within the box of what my property allows, because I can't have them to be like elk and just running free. So how can I get them as close to that and then keep them here? Well, in what really stemmed all this stuff was the beef side of it. Is I've had grass-fed beef that, though grass-fed and healthy cow, didn't taste very good. And because it was eating the less than grasses because of how it was raised or when it was butchered. So then I geeked out on, and this is where it came back into how I manage my ground of how can I get a elk taste so darn good? How can I make a grass fed cow taste as good, if not better, than the elk I bring home? And this is where it was like, okay, I need to have primo grasses out there that they're eating so that they're eating all the high sugar grasses. And then I need to butcher them for me at certain moments in time. And this is where I've had to even educate people of, you know, they're like, well, I'd like a cow right now. Can you help me out with that? And it's like, well, it's August. It's the heat of August. And I've got them moving out there, but the grass that is growing or the grass that are hitting is a little more, it's a little drier. It's not as lush. The sugar contents dip down a little bit because of the heat. So now we've changed the flavor of the grass. So I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I want you to wait. So like my butchering time is at the tail end. I butcher beginning of July, which is very different than a lot of people because I want all the premium grasses, right? I want them to hit all the grasses. I want it to come back. And then I know that then the beef that's coming off the property is really good. Now, some areas, my area included occasionally, I can get some really good fall growth. Sometimes Mother Nature doesn't allow it. I've had years where I haven't seen a drop of rain from April 1 till almost November 1. That gets tough. You have to adapt your situation. You then have to, when the grass stops growing completely or you don't have the ground, then I revert. I'm like, okay, we got to switch to hay, which is not ideal because this is taking away from my winter hay. But what do? Well, I then realize I need to bring in hay. I leave 10% hay on the ground. Now, a lot of people don't like that because 10% hay, 10% of that hay is money. But if I'm going to keep them on that area or in an area, I want to leave 10% down because now I'm adding carbon and I still move them into areas. Now, what I'm doing is I'm not moving them into areas where I want them to graze. I'm moving them areas where I need to put more carbon down because I notice that the grass doesn't have the soil content that it needs. So now I'm putting them on areas where this isn't about grazing grass anymore. This is about putting carbon because I'm not growing grass at 110 degrees. I don't care. Everything's just stopped. And now I'm almost out of ground of where to put them. So now I've changed paths. Now this is gonna hurt a bit, but we're gonna start to replenish the carbon because when we come out of this the next year, all of a sudden, bingo, I'm running with more grass. It's healing better. It's holding more water to where if I have another drought year, I'm holding more ground. And then my neighbor is coming up to me and saying, how do you still have green grass and you're moving in July when I'm done? And this is why you just look at everything and you geek out on it and you just see what your cows are doing and what your grass is doing.
Are you doing any soil testing, or are you just going based
So
off
we
grass?
have done some soil testing. I did some soil testing on one area that was abused, and that was actually my winter pasture. That's another area that's been fun to really uh, try to improve. When I first moved onto the property, it was dirt. I mean, a weed wouldn't even grow on this thing. Mother Nature hadn't even put the band-aid on yet. And weeds are the Mother Nature's band-aid. She hadn't even put a band-aid on this darn thing yet. And we started putting the cows on there, started putting the hay out there, and we started to heal it. But of course, we had a huge amount of weeds. And this is where then I did a little bit of soil testing in the beginning. I did one section where I was going to leave it alone, and then I did another section where I bale grazed. So then what I did was I rolled out my hay so that they had to move their manure and everything around so it wasn't local into one spot. And I bale grazed this whole area except for this one. And we soil tested it to see the one area I didn't do versus the next area I did. And all of a sudden you could see start the tick. It's slow, it's not quick, but you were starting to see it go in the direction. It's hard to get more soil testing. I'd love to have a way to just do it myself because of where I live. To get people out here to do it is a real chore. You can conservation districts and whatnot can help you out with that, but sometimes getting it done in the time frame that you need to, it just never quite works out. But I've taken that area, which then grew in my big thing was knapweed. I grew a ton of knapweed, which knapweed animals, especially goats, they'll graze it when it's a nice purple flower. But once it goes past a purple flower, it turns to a crazy hard stick. It's inedible and it's almost hard to mow. And I had that whole thing, you could see it. It was just knapweed. And then I kept doing this and doing this. And I've had people from the conservation district that were here on year two. And they came out here last year and they were like, holy smokes, Derek, it's pretty much all grass. And I'm like, it's just me putting carbon and then giving it time to rest. It's carbon, carbon, carbon. And this then has allowed for me to even change and adapt my winter grazing area to make it to where I can graze them longer into the winter because Highlands are such a versatile breed of cow. They can bust through snow as long as there's some grass underneath there. I have to watch them closely to make sure that they're getting the nutrient level that they need. But this is where then I'm able to then grow from there. So it's been fun to see the areas that have improved over the years.
Interesting. So, Derek, as we kind of wrap up here a little bit, could you kind of give us an idea of what you are doing in the wintertime? I know you touched on it a little bit, and honestly, it probably is its own whole like podcast, but could you kind of give us an idea of what you're doing in the wintertime?
Yeah, so for me, I have my main water system, right? So I we dealt with we dealt with garden hoses and everything during winter. I think my wife about divorced me on the 50th frozen garden hose. So I put in a permanent non-freeze water system in there to help with that system. But the big one that we do is I find I I used to produce my own hay, which but I'm now grazing that ground because it allows for me to bring more cattle. So I bring in hay from other areas. So it's other local grasses that I know, and then I spread it out. I do not. I want the carbon everywhere. So I always say it's like take the amount of cattle, how much poundage you need. Highlands versus Angus. It's there's kind of that moving target, pregnant, not pregnant, and everything. Figure out how much hay you need to make your cattle happy for that winter, and then add 10%. And it hurts because you're like, well, that's money. Yes, it is. But it comes back in the end for the ground. And what you're going to do is you're going to put it out there and you're going to, whether you're doing round bales, like I've done round bales where I put it on the back of my tractor and I just roll it in a big sheet. And that spreads out the cattle, it spreads out the manure, it spreads out the urine that they're dropping, and it spreads out the carbon that I'm putting out. Now, if you're not doing that and you're doing small squares, that's fine too. I always say instead of rolling it out, connect the dots. Throw chunks out and try to connect the dots by the time you get to, springtime. If you're doing the big bales, the big 1,200 pound or 2,000 pound bales, that's fine too. Spread it out, make it so that maybe they sit in that section for a couple days, but then put the next bale over on the other side of whatever chunk you have and make them focus over there. Cattle will spread it out. They will leave some down. This adds seed bank. This adds carbon. It puts a cover on the ground so that when all of a sudden the spring rains hit, it goes down. It puts a nice shield level to keep the temperature of the soil down to where all of a sudden the grass and the seed bank's like, man, I'm hitting the perfect environment. This is good. And then it goes. And now all of a sudden you've started to go down the path of like what I've said of the 21-day cycle of grass. I mean, grass is its own living organism that I think sometimes we forget about because we focus on the cow, because that's the big thing right in front of us. And we have to focus on the grass because if you focus on the grass, the cow will benefit in the end hugely, not only in size, health, pregnancy, everything. You'll see better with moving. You don't have as much contamination with other manure, so your parasitic load has dropped down. There's a whole lot of correlation with moving your ground, having healthy ground, and the health of your animal. And a lot of people get focused solely on the cow, which is the cow. I mean, that's what everybody loves to look at. And you have to remember to look at what they're walking on.
That's excellent. Yeah, a lot of good advice there. Derek, let's do another podcast right into the next topic. But I guess as we wrap up here, what's a piece of advice that you would give to somebody who's new to cattle, just getting into cattle or thinking about getting into Highland cattle?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing that I've learned, and it's what I tell a lot of people now, is think of your infrastructure. You got to think of your infrastructure first. So many people, and I was one of, I did the exact thing that I'm saying not to do is you immediately buy land and you say, I'm buying cows. And then you're in a mad scramble of holy smokes, I've got these animals. How do I take care of them so that they're nice and healthy and happy? So I always tell people, I'm like, figure out how you want to do this and look at the infrastructure that you need. And because for me, I have my job as a firefighter. I had to figure out really quick of how do I make chores quick. I mean, I got two kids, they do sports and everything like that. So when all of a sudden, I say, oh, I'm going to buy a bunch of cows and just figure out mob grazing. Well, when I first got started, that chore took a while because I was scrambling. So I always say is like, pick the path of how you want to raise your animals, how you want to raise your improve your ground, whatever it may be. And then think about the infrastructure. You don't need to spend a fortune. You don't need to do any of that kind of stuff, but you need to think about your infrastructure so that it works with your chores and works with your animals, so that your sanity stays intact, so that you keep doing it in 5 years instead of saying, this isn't for me, I'm tired. Because that happens to a lot of people. And we want more farmers, ranchers out there, small operations, and doing this kind of stuff. And I think to keep people sane and happy and having fun, especially if they've got other jobs and kids and other things that they're getting pulled in many different directions, making sure you have a little bit of infrastructure. And again, doesn't need to be expensive. Just what works for your property in place. It helps with sanity when it comes to this stuff drastically.
Yeah, that's great advice. I wish we could just like make everyone who's ever considered having cattle listen to that piece of advice, because I mean at the end of the day, I think we've all been there in one way or another. We've found ourselves unprepared, and
Mm-hmm.
ultimately it is about being the best caretakers we can for that animal. So that's an excellent advice. Excellent advice. Well, Derek, thank you so much. This has been really fun. I think we would get along if we lived a little bit closer to each other. But no, thank you, and thank you to your wife. We'll definitely have you back if you're good with it. And
Oh,
also,
yeah, no, this was great. Thank you so much for having me and my family on.
excellent. Um, if you're okay with it, we'll probably tag your farm at the end of the episode, so people can find you if they
Yeah.
have questions or want to buy beef or something like that.
Yeah.
I'd be
I always say, oh, sorry. I always say, look, anybody that wants to talk to me or message me, I love helping people out through this stuff because I've learned a lot. I'm still learning. I'm by no means an expert. I learn every day. I try to read more and more. And I just like to help anybody get their first step out the door because doing this stuff is awesome. Having cattle, running a little big, small operation, it's an amazing life for your family, for yourself, for whatever your situation is. It really is awesome. And I I just love helping people get started. So anybody can reach out to me. I can talk about this stuff all day.
awesome. Yeah, everything's better with cows around, that's for sure.
Oh yeah.
Well, Derek, thanks again. Thank you to you and your wife for making time for us, and we'll definitely see you again in the future, and
Yeah.
we'll go from there. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.